revolutionary like I'm Huey Newton. Che Guevara when them bullets start shooting.
Hello comrades, and welcome to another episode of Communism for Beginners. And this time we are on Foundations of Leninism Chapter 3, which talks about theory. And if you haven't read Chapter 3 of Foundations of Leninism, then you should do that. I will put some links in the description where you can listen to an audio version or read it. And if you haven't watched the previous episodes, then I suggest you do that. Okay, again, a really good chapter. As I've said previously, it's been a while since I've read this, so I didn't even remember, but I think it's one of those things where, you know, the first time you read something you don't really get much out of it, but when you reread it, you actually understand it a lot better. So that's why I think that when I first read this I didn't really understand much, but now that I'm reading it again, I am able to gain much more from this text. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this chapter, and let's see, I wrote some notes. So there's three important issues of theory that Stalin brings up about Leninism. So there's first one is the importance of theory for the proletarian movement. So I think many communists nowadays, they realize that theory is really important for the movement, but I mean, I guess there are people who don't really see that. But anyway, he goes on to explain that theory is actually pretty important, and he there's a couple of famous quotes by Lenin that he cites. For example, without a revolutionary theory there can be no revolutionary movement, and the role of the vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. And we'll get to the vanguard party, the theory of the vanguard party later, but basically, you know, if you don't know what a vanguard is, it's like they're supposed to be the leader group. They're not like not like a leader who sits back behind the front lines and just orders everyone else to march forward. Their vanguard is the what's the word, like the first leading detachment, like the spearhead, which leads by example, goes forward, and everybody else follows them. So in a way it's kind of inaccurate to say that it's like a leader party, in that it like commands everyone else to do something. No, it's like the first detachment which marches in the front ranks. So anyway, so basically the vanguard, the leader, has to be led by the most advanced theory. And then there's the criticism of the theory of spontaneity, which is a really important thing. And then there's the theory of proletarian revolution. So what is the theory of spontaneity? Well, this is what he says in the section 2. He says, criticism of the theory of spontaneity, or the role of the vanguard in the movement. The theory of spontaneity is a theory of opportunism, a theory of worshipping the spontaneity of the labor movement, a theory which actually repudiates the leading role of the vanguard of the working class, the party of the working class. The theory of worshipping spontaneity is decidedly opposed to giving the spontaneous movement a politically conscious, planned character. It is opposed to the party marching at the head of the working class, to the party raising the masses to the level of political consciousness, to the party leading the movement. It is in favor of the politically conscious elements of the movement, not hindering the movement from taking its own course. It is in favor of the party only heeding the spontaneous movement and dragging at the tail of it. The theory of spontaneity is the theory of belittling the role of the conscious element in the movement, the ideology of Quostism, the logical basis of all opportunism. This is especially in like among anarchists and trade union people, I guess. This is somewhat widespread. Even today you hear this a lot from like these liberal types who are like, you know, we just need like a horizontally organized, non-hierarchical, like grassroots mass movement, no leaders, no nothing. So it's the kind of idea that, you know, people just spontaneously realize that stuff is wrong, and then they just spontaneously revolt, and then that supposedly leads to something. And for example, like if you look at Occupy Wall Street, that was like a good example of it, because it was just an uncoordinated mess. I mean, people just, it was a spontaneous movement, no direction, no nothing, no leadership. So spontaneous revolts always happen, but those are not necessarily revolutionary or at least consciously political. The same thing happens with trade unions. The trade union struggle is essentially it's economic struggle. It's not political. It's struggle for better wages, better working conditions, and whatnot. So the workers unite together. It's better than like outright one guy trying to get better wages or whatnot. So at least the workers are uniting together, and in a general strike they might like unite with all the workers of the country to do something, but it's still usually not consciously political. Of course, there are political general strikes and stuff like that, which are really revolutionary. But anyway, it's important to realize that this idea of spontaneity it's this worshipping of the spontaneous mass is wrong. And let's see, what does he say here? It's the repudiation of the idea that there should be any kind of political consciousness involved, that it's just a spontaneous revolt, but that doesn't really lead into anything usually. That there needs to be leadership, and it's not like this separate, that like the party is some separate entity which just comes along and starts leading the ignorant mass. No, that's actually the theory of heroes and the crowd, which the Bolsheviks opposed. The party is actually supposed to not be a separate entity which leads the ignorant mass. It's supposed to be an integral part of the mass. The masses organize themselves into the party. So the most politically conscious elements of the masses themselves become the party. If the party becomes separated from the mass, then that's a serious crisis. And Kvostism, I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up. Kvost is Russian for tail, so it's tailism or tail-endism. So it's basically this anarchist idea that, I mean, anarchists don't say that, but what anarchists actually do, they want to drag at the tail of the spontaneous movement. There's a spontaneous revolt. The anarchists want to just drag at the tail instead of saying, actually, we want some leadership into this movement and we want to push this movement forward and give it some political consciousness. Okay, so some other stuff that he talks about, he talks about how the revolution, he talks about world revolution and stuff like that. Now, if you don't know what socialism in one country is, then I guess that's that. But if you know what socialism in one country is, or if you've at least heard of it, then basically what I'm getting at, the idea of the world revolution, what he's talking about, doesn't contradict socialism in one country. So if you think it does, then I would recommend you go check my video about socialism in one country that I did for Red Scare TV, where I talk about what socialism in one country actually is, because I know that it is confusing, because that term gets thrown around a lot, but people don't necessarily know what it means. The same thing with permanent revolution, which Stalin also deals with in this chapter. So he talks about the democratic revolution passing into the socialist revolution, which is this idea that the revolution is not like a two-stage thing where there's like this massive, like Lenin said, like this artificial Chinese wall between the two stages, because there are always like definite stages that you can identify, but that doesn't mean that the revolution is not continuous. The democratic revolution, like the anti-Tsar, anti-feudal, anti-imperialist revolution, should grow into socialism, is what Lenin is getting at. But what exactly is the difference between permanent revolution and Lenin's idea? Because there is a difference. Trotskyists would have you believe that there is no difference. They would have you believe that, sometimes they say that Lenin actually accepted Trotsky's permanent revolution theory in his April thesis when he demanded the overthrow of the revolutionary provisional government, the liberal, socialist, capitalist bloc coalition government, which took over after the overthrow of the Tsar in the February Revolution of 1917, and the October Revolution happened, in October, which was when they overthrew the provisional government. So Stalin says here that, quote, Lenin fought the adherents of permanent revolution not over the question of uninterruptedness, for Lenin himself maintained the point of view of uninterrupted revolution. So that is key to understand, that this idea that the democratic revolution grows into socialism is actually more in line with Lenin than with Trotsky, although Trotskyists also constantly talk about that. But Lenin definitely believed in that. So it was not that he wanted to separate it into these kind of stages where they complete one part and then they just wait and do nothing, and then in some distant future they do the other part. No, he definitely wanted it to be continuous. It was the Mensheviks who wanted to stop after the democratic revolution and then like wait for 100 years for capitalism to develop, because they thought that without developed capitalism, socialism would be impossible because of, the economic backwardness and cultural backwardness of Russia at the time. But he continues, but because they underestimated the role of the peasantry, which is an enormous reserve of the proletariat, because they failed to understand the idea of the hegemony of the proletariat. So that is another key issue, that you see a lot of these quotes where Lenin criticizes permanent revolution a lot. He said that it repudiates the role of the peasantry, and he said that, he mockingly said that Trotsky is fine and original. Like, he obviously said that ironically, that this fine and original theory, that it borrows half of it from Menshevism and half of it from Bolshevism, so it's like not original in the slightest, because it takes from the Bolsheviks the idea that the proletariat needs to take power, and it takes from the Mensheviks the idea that the peasantry is reactionary and should not be trusted. And really the peasant issue was where Lenin had his biggest problem with permanent revolution. So he continues, the idea of permanent revolution should not be regarded as a new idea. It was first advanced by Marx at the end of the 40s in his well-known address to the Communist League, 1850. It is from this document that our permanentists took the idea of interrupted revolution. It should be noted that in taking it from Marx, our permanentists altered it somewhat, and in altering it, spoiled it, and made it unfit for practical use. The experienced hand of Lenin was needed to rectify this mistake, to take Marx's idea of uninterrupted revolution in its pure form and make it a cornerstone of his theory of revolution. And this is actually pretty surprising, because this is what I've been saying for a long time, and I didn't even remember that Stalin had said pretty much the exact same thing in this book, because I had always wondered why Trotskyists think that this uninterrupted revolution idea is like so new and novel idea, even though it literally comes from Marx. Even the term permanent revolution comes from Marx. So like he says, they took the idea from Marx, but then they altered it. They decided that it also means repudiation of the role of the peasantry, and then later it also meant denying the possibility of building socialism in one country, or in Russia specifically, which is a Menshevik position. So the real difference between permanent revolution and Lenin's idea of revolution is that with Trotsky, he saw the peasant. He saw the democratic revolution as kind of unnecessary, like because the democratic revolution would unite the capitalists, the small owners who are the peasants, and then the workers. All those forces against the feudal system, against the monarchy. And Trotsky didn't think that was like the big deal. He thought that they should just go for socialism right away. And therefore the peasantry wasn't really needed, because he didn't think the peasantry was in favor of socialism, because the peasants definitely want to get rid of the landlords, but they're still small owners, so they don't want collective ownership. They don't want to give up their small holdings, which to an extent is true, but basically what that means is he's saying that the majority of the population is not in favor of socialism, so it's basically impossible to even do anything, and the revolution would never have survived without the peasantry. It's just ridiculous to say that it would. So Lenin's idea was that the democratic revolution together with the peasants, grows into socialism, so that the socialism is not like the first step, it's actually the crowning achievement of the revolution, of the continuous revolutionary process, where Trotsky thought that, they should just go for socialism, actually, which is why he demanded the overthrow of the provisional government. Lenin's idea was that the democratic movement would grow into a socialist revolution, and the socialism would be like the crowning achievement of that. But in any case, if you want to know what the whole conflict between like socialism in one country versus the permanent revolution, that's a whole different topic. Lenin didn't really criticize the permanent revolution that much because it repudiated the possibility of building socialism in one country, although he did that as well to an extent, and he definitely defended socialism in one country, although the term wasn't around yet. He just said that, it's possible to build socialism in Russia even if nobody else helps them, which basically is socialism in one country. But if you want to know more about that, then I will put the link in the description so you can check out my video that I made for Red Scare TV about that. But yeah, that's it for this episode, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye bye.